I've got technological limitations. Okay, I think this might work.
It's working.
Oh, it is. Is that on? Does that look right?
It looks perfect.
Great, perfect. Oh, that's an improvement on the usual. That's very good. I got inspired actually when I was listening to some of those talks, and thank you all very much for the students that were able to do that. Yeah, really, really inspiring, and it actually made me reflect on the talk that I'm doing now, and just think I feel like my time is completely wasted in sharing all this information because I think colleagues have gone through it so brilliantly. And I also got inspired by Trevor and his story as well about his background and what have you. And so I quickly amended my slides. So I thought it would be helpful to just provide a little bit of context. So the picture that you see on the bottom left-hand side is my mother and I, and I was brought up as a single parent in a sort of a mixed race family. So my mother came over from an island in the South Atlantic called Saint Helena back in the 1960s, coming across on the metaphorical banana boat, and it was quite an intimidating scene for her at the age of 16, and she went into service and worked for the Earl of Bradford, as was the case for many people in that age. And doing fairly trivial jobs in service, but managed to find a home. Anyway, I came along, and we lived on in London, actually, much very similar to Trevor, but I lived on the other side of London. I lived in southwest London, and I was brought up on a council house estate as a single family. So I had very little aspirations about education. If someone was to say I was going to do a PhD, I think I would probably have laughed at them, and certainly would have done at that time. And I really only had aspirations to go into the army. And the picture that you see there on the right hand side is me and some colleagues in Bosnia. So that was back from the early 1990s. But anyway, those times disappeared fairly quickly, and I left the army in 1993 now, I think. Oh, God, blimey, I'm testing my mind now. In 1993, and I had very little qualifications. I think I had an O level in geography and one in PE, so I was quite good at sport. And I had lots of friends that were professionals because I played in the rugby team, and they said, "Well, why don't you go to university?" And university was not for the likes of me or my background, but actually, someone took a chance on me, gave me an opportunity to go into an access course, and I ended up doing an undergraduate degree in sport and exercise science down in southwest London. I did really well on that. I think because I was a little bit older at the age of 28, I was very motivated. Didn't finish that degree until I was 31, and then went direct entry onto a PhD. I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship, and like Trevor, I did quite well in my undergraduate degree and was the highest mark in the faculty, and someone that they wanted to try. And I think probably because I was a little bit older and been around the bushes a little bit, and a little bit more experienced and driven. But really, and now I've got to the position now where I'm dean of the graduate school at Northumbria. Who would have thought it? So I think probably the story from that is like anything is possible, because if I can do it, I'm pretty sure that there are lots of other people that can too. So my role at Northumbria is to look after all of our PhD students across the whole university, and that goes from professional doctorates to traditional PhDs, and everything in between. So if you're studying anything doctoral, then you broadly come under my remit, if you like. And we have about 1,000 PhD students registered at Northumbria, so it's a good number, but not as many as some other places. And we've got an array of ways to fund those PhDs. It did strike me when I was putting this together about I wonder what do people really know what a doctorate is? And navigating some of the basics I thought would be quite helpful, but it feels like the group is quite well up to speed with what that might look like. So I won't dwell on it too much, and I'll try and whistle through these quite quickly because I think a lot of the material has already been spoken to already. But the long and short of it is that you can do, and I'm going to focus particularly on PhDs and doctoral study rather than MReses and other other research qualifications, but particularly on the doctorate. And the long and short of it is you can pretty much do a doctorate in everything. So, I mean, some of the images there give you an idea about what might be possible. So there's oceanography there. You can do law. It could be chemistry, health sciences, and even the sport and exercise sciences offer a very good suite of programs. But probably the most important thing is to find what connects with you. So what's a PhD student? Well, again, we've gone through this to some extent, but traditionally the standard duration full time is 3 years. But there are some exceptions to that. So some UKRI funded studentships can be funded for a longer period of time, and some industry funded PhDs can also be for a longer period of time. Part time is traditionally 5 years, but as I mentioned, depending on the funding model, will depend on what you're able to do. Some topics, interestingly, can be really prescribed, and we've spoken a little bit about. I remember Maria talking about she had pretty much free reign. So if you've been funded by the Pro-NE initiative, you can do whatever you like, pretty much, which is really brilliant thing to do. But often, particularly if PhDs are funded by industry partners, they're often quite prescribed. It doesn't mean that you don't have any say in what happens, but it might be that there is a course of questions that need to be answered. So actually, there's quite a difference or quite an array of PhDs that you might be able to do, and they go right from being able to come up with your own research questions and being able to deliver those to something that's much more prescribed, and then you probably put on some of the nuts and bolts around it just to make it a little bit more nuanced, and obviously you have ownership of that. But very often, they're developed between you and the PhD student. So just to contextualize this, some of you will have seen this figure before. So the little blue circle in the middle there. So if you imagine the big circle around the outside is the body of knowledge on the planet. Blue is your elementary schooling. The green circle outside is your secondary school education. And then when you do your bachelor's, that's the sort of pinky color that you see. And then you're starting to specialize in a particular area. And you can see that just sneaking out towards that knowledge boundary. Oh, has it come back? Yes. And then onto a master's degree. And then as you start your PhD, you start to extend that knowledge right to the boundaries of where that knowledge boundary will lie. And the key thing about a PhD for me is that you are generating or contributing to the body of knowledge. So what you're trying to do is essentially sneak a little bit outside that circle. And whilst it looks quite trivial, I can tell you now the journey to make that happen is really not very trivial. And some of those people that are living that now, so people like Melissa, Maureen and Maria, who we've heard from, will know that journey is not linear. And this illustration gives you a really nice vision about what you think it might be and what the reality probably actually is. So in utopia, it'll be this nice linear progression, and you start your PhD and your proposal, and you tick along and you do your research, and then you get to the end. But the reality is that there's all sorts of hazards, there's all sorts of roller coasters of emotions. Things will go badly, things will go really well. And it is really a test of people's resolve. So it's really important when you do a PhD that you're pretty passionate about it, because if you're disinterested about the topic that you're doing and you don't have passion about it, then the chances are when you come to some of these challenges, you're more likely to disappear from the PhD. And you don't want to do that, because you invest a lot of time and resource. There's a lot of people putting a lot of time and resource into you. So it's really important that you connect with the topic that you're with. Being organised, self-motivated. And I think what's most interesting about doing a PhD is that you've got a huge amount of autonomy. So we heard, I think it was Melissa that was talking about that she only has a meeting with her supervisors maybe once a month for a couple of hours, and that's quite normal. You would still be around the PhD environment and other PhD students if you're at the university, but actually the contact time that you might have with supervisors could be relatively limited. So although you might have also email conversations, perhaps catching up online, the sort of the face-to-face contact might be quite limited. So being autonomous and being able to take control of those studies is really important. And I think we've heard this before as well. Being tenacious and determined is absolutely critical, and that sort of, I suppose, will evolve your resilience to being able to take knockbacks. And when you get your manuscripts back from your supervisor and you think it's your best work and it gets red inked everywhere, it develops a certain amount of resilience. But you need to be happy to be challenged, and I think being able to cognitively process that, I think, is really, really important. And then the other thing, which I think is critical, which actually Ben spoke to really, really well, is being able to connect with people, and that can open up all sorts of other opportunities whilst you're doing your PhD. Because although you might be doing your studies, if you're based at the university, there is a huge amount of opportunity above and beyond the PhD that you're doing. And it might be supporting other PhD students. It could be getting involved with teaching and learning. It could be volunteering to do other bits and pieces like mentoring, for example, for more junior PhD students, which actually is really, really exciting and great experience to do. So I think being connected with people is really important. I know Debbie's going to talk a little bit about funding, so I won't go on too much about this, but there are a number of different ways in which you can fund a PhD. Now, probably the most prestigious is UKRI. So those of you not familiar, that's the UK Research Institute, and essentially that is government funding, but they're very, very competitive, I think is probably the only word I would describe it as. Most of the projects that you can do with them are generally autonomous, and you can generate your own research project, which is really, really good. But the great thing about UKRI funding, perhaps more than most other areas of funding, is that you get your fees paid, you get your stipend paid, and there's usually a generous training budget, which means that you might be able to go to conferences, you might be able to attend training sessions to upskill on a particular technique, for example. So there's lots and lots of nuts and bolts that are around that PhD that make that journey, I suppose, more palatable in many, many ways. Some institutions fund them, and certainly we do at Northumbria. Again, they're very, very competitive. The ones that generally come with a stipend, so that's if you like your living expenses, which is around just short of £20,000 now, and fees are usually competitive. There's also industry-funded ones. Those PhDs tend to be a little bit more prescribed, because very often the industry is funding a particular topic or a particular area or questions that they need specific answers to. So often often what you find with those projects is that they are quite prescribed in what they are delivering. There are a number of different scholarships as well that are available, and they can be from governmental and non-governmental agencies, charities. Generally, they're quite well funded, but some of them might be only fees or one element of a PhD or partially funding a PhD. So be mindful about what you're applying for with some of those scholarships. And then the other one, of course, is self-funded, where you take the fees, and you have to obviously find your own way for living costs. So, but the great thing about that self-funding, you get a great amount of autonomy in what you're doing. There's no competition. If you reach the entry requirements, then you can go and do a PhD, which is and assuming you have a supervisor that's able to be able to guide you through that. But the problem with that, of course, is there is very little resource. As I mentioned, there's full-time and part-time study. Just to give you a flavour for what fees are, so at the moment, UKRI is just short of £5,000 if you were looking to pay for that, and a stipend is again just shy of £20,000. So if you've got a full funded PhD, then all of those costs are met for you already, which is great. At Northumbria, we have something called the RDF competition. We offer up to 100 fully funded PhDs across the whole university. So that includes fees and stipend. There aren't other costs associated with that, but if there are running costs for a particular project, then usually the PhD supervisor will need to find those. There's a number of different UKRI initiatives that we're connected with, and one of those is actually with Debbie and her team over at Durham, the 9DTP, which has just been renewed. So congratulations on that again, Debbie. Well done, brilliant work on that. And they're really good projects to be involved with, because usually they are doctoral training centres around particular themes. So if you have an interest, for example, in the social sciences, then the 9 DTP could be a really good place for you to apply. But I suspect Debbie will talk a little bit more to that. Northumbria started just recently a fee scholarship where we're offering around about 40 fee scholarships to particularly to Northumbria alumni, because we're conscious that there's a huge number of talented individuals that don't quite meet the competitive level, if you like, for some of those PhD or funded PhD opportunities. Because there's only a finite amount of them, we often find that there are lots and lots of really great people that are able to do a PhD, but just on the day there's someone just a little bit better. It's not that they're not capable of doing it, but we're not able to fund everybody. So we're using this initiative to be able to try and support people to be able to engage in PhD studies. So we now meet the fees for up to about 40 of those per annum. And what that helps us to do is just to try and drive a little bit more social mobility. So the university is really motivated to being able to support underrepresented groups. So, and what we've also been able to do is that this year we're putting at least 5 of those scholarships for racially minoritized groups. The caveat to that is that they are home students. So at the moment, that doesn't apply to international students. And there's lots of reasons behind that, which I won't go into now. But at the moment, it's only for home students. And then lastly, there's a self-funded option, which of course is open to everybody. And something that doesn't necessarily get spoken about, and I'm not suggesting that anyone should get into more debt than perhaps they might be already, but there is also postgraduate loans available to take if you wanted to do a PhD. So that's always an option if you're desperate to go through that self-funded route and don't quite have the shillings to be able to do it. Just a couple of little tips from me is just make sure that the PhD is for you. You spend an enormous amount of time and energy doing this PhD, and it's not a trivial undertaking. So just make sure it's the right thing for you. So, have conversations with people to understand what the PhD is about. If you can, try to get some experience in the research you're interested in, and Ben spoke a little bit to that. So those of you that are in study at the moment, I find very often universities have an enormous number of opportunities to be able to go and experience as an intern or a volunteer. And nearly always PhD students are always really grateful for another pair of hands in the laboratory or helping out with some data collection or analysis. So there's great opportunities not only to improve your experience, but also get some insights into what it's like to be a PhD student. Identifying your study area, of course, is absolutely critical, which we've already touched upon. Identifying opportunities, funded versus unfunded, what suits you best, and particularly in relation to some of those things that you might have to juggle. I remember Maria talking earlier about, she's had a career already, and she's had a family. So there are lots and lots of competing interests for time and your resource. So is funded the best way to go, or is it better to go unfunded? There's a whole number of, and there's no right or wrong answer necessarily, but you need to make sure that it's right for you. And then lastly, and I think probably the most critical thing to getting a successful application is making sure you connect with the right supervisor. So firstly, a supervisor with expertise in the area and a track record in the area that you would like to work in. But importantly, that you also connect with that supervisor, because you're going to spend quite a lot of time with them, and you need to have, if you like, some shared values and ways of working. And I think if you can do that from a very early stage and gain that rapport, it then becomes much easier then to be able to put in a successful application, because that supervisor will be motivated to be able to have you as a PhD student, because it also benefits them enormously. Because I think it's an enormous privilege to be able to supervise PhD students, and if a good student comes across my way and I have the opportunity or the space and capacity to support them, then I would love to have them. So it's definitely worth connecting with supervisors. May, that's all from me. I'm sorry I've gone on far too long.
Thank you so much for this. Let's see if there's any questions. And again, a wonderful initiative at Northumbria. This is really, really great to see that there are more ring-fenced scholarships for our racially minoritized students.
Yeah, we're really keen to support the initiative, though, Mayor. I think I mean, I'm trying to think how long the project's been going for now. It must be 3 years now, I'm guessing. Yeah, gosh, it's gone so quickly.
Yeah.
And we've been trying to support it as best we possibly can, but we know that there's more that we can do, and the racially minoritized group, particularly in the UK, is hugely underrepresented, and in the Northeast, it's even more challenging to be able to support that. I mean, largely because the population of racially minoritized groups often is lower in the Northeast than it is in many other parts of the country. So, but they offer that group of individuals offer so much more, and I think that it just lends for a much more rich landscape and research environment by having those people involved with our research and the culture that we're trying to develop.
Benjamin